They thought they could just take a troll in with smug grins and clipboards.
Hey,
Slap a violation
that's my
notice on
tractor.
my fence.
What do you think you're
and tow
doing?
my tractor right off my property like I was some criminal. But what they didn't count on was that I wasn't just a retired farmer. I was a man who knew his rights, kept every document, and had friends in the county courthouse who didn't take kindly to HOA bullies with too much time and 0 cents. This all started when I moved into my wife's family home after she passed. A quiet rural community turned suburban HOA experiment, where folks used to wave as they drove past, but now peered over fences and filed complaints if your grass got too long. I never wanted trouble. All I wanted was peace, and to keep the little bit of land left by my father-in-law's old farm intact. That included the red diesel John Deere tractor I parked in the carport, the same one he used to maintain. Our Tuker spread. It wasn't shiny, but it ran like a dream, and I still used it to mow the backfield, tow mulch, and occasionally give the neighbors' kids a ride around the yard. But to Karen Prescott, our self-appointed HOA president with her brittle smile and a voice sharp enough to strip paint, that tractor was a declaration of war. The first letter came with formal flair, unregistered vehicle visible from street violation. #0873, I laughed. Then I called her, told her it was a registered agricultural machine, exempt from motor vehicle display ordinances, and fully insured. I even emailed her a scanned copy of the county exemption. She replied with a 2-word email. Doesn't matter. I should have known then she wouldn't let it go. Over the next few weeks, I got more notices on unsightly equipment, mechanical nuisance, and my favorite, visual disruption to neighborhood harmony. Harmony. This was the same woman who painted her mailbox neon peach and held HOA meetings in yoga pants screaming about wind chimes and dog poop. I tried to reason with her, offered to move the tractor behind the shed. He even offered to put up a lattice screen. She refused every compromise. It's a blight, she said during the monthly HOA meeting, where she'd packed the room with her clique of pearl-wearing, clipboard-wielding suburban stormtroopers. One guy in the back, Tommy, a war vet who used to grow tomatoes in peace, chuckled and whispered, "You're next." I didn't know what he meant until 3 days later, when I came home from a supply run to find the tractor gone. I thought it was stolen, called the sheriff in a panic. He ran a plate search, then paused. "Sir," he said, "your tractor was towed by a private company. Says here it was reported as an abandoned hazard by the HOA." Stood in stunned silence, blood boiling. "They towed it off private land," I said. "But they don't have the right," the sheriff sighed. "Not without a court order." I demanded to know where it was, and drove an hour to the impound lot, where I found my John Deere chained between 2 rusted sedans like it was some felon. I took photos, paid the release fee, which I planned to fight, and hauled it back with a friend's trailer. But I didn't pull it into the carport. No, I parked it right on the HOA's manicured median outside the clubhouse at midnight, with a sign that read, "Seized without cause. Now it's our turn." I didn't sleep that night, but I didn't have to wait long. At 7:42 a.m., Karen Prescott screamed loud enough to wake the squirrels. She called the sheriff. She called the HOA board. She even called the local news. And when the deputy arrived and asked me what the hell I was doing, calmly handed him a folder titled registration, photos of the tractor on my property, the towing report, my emails with Karen, and the county code. He flipped through it, eyebrows rising. "She authorized a tow without legal grounds," he muttered. Karen exploded. "It's an eyesore. This is a community, not a junkyard." The deputy held up a hand. "Ma'am, this is civil overreach. You trespassed via private contractor." That was the moment her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked like someone had unplugged her. Neighbors began to gather. Phones came out. Tommy showed up in a lawn chair with popcorn. The deputy turned to me and said, "Sir, if you move the tractor back to your property, I'll escort you and file an official report. You can press charges if you want." I nodded, heart pounding. I wasn't done, but I was playing smart. I wanted every step documented, every word on record. This wasn't just about a tractor anymore. It was about power, about a woman who thought the HOA made her queen, and about what happens when good people are pushed 1 inch too far. So I looked her dead in the eye, nodded politely, and said, "Let's go home." What happened next sparked a firestorm: legal hearings, anonymous letters, property inspections, and a buried scandal that went all the way back to the HOA's founding. But I'm getting ahead of myself. If you think the tractor was the whole story, you're dead wrong. That was just the match. The fire's still coming. Subscribe to the Sham Stories YouTube channel, because what Karen did next will leave your jaw on the floor. The tractor was back in my carport by noon, resting in its rightful spot like a war hero returned from battle. And as the sheriff drove off after shaking my hand and telling me to keep every scrap of paper, I thought maybe that would be the end of it. Maybe public embarrassment would finally put an end to Karen's tantrums and HOA theatrics, but I was wrong. Because if there was one thing I underestimated, it was how far a petty tyrant like her would go when her authority was challenged in public, especially in front of a crowd that had started clapping when the sheriff read her the trespassing statute aloud. That day, I received more than a dozen texts from neighbors, most of whom had been too scared or tired to speak up before, thanking me for standing up and asking if I could help them fight similar complaints about fences, about tool sheds, about unapproved gardening decor. One guy, Brent, told me they'd find him $500 for parking his pickup truck on his own gravel driveway because it wasn't HOA-approved gravel. The stories poured in, and I began to realize this wasn't just about Karen and a tractor. It was about a system she'd built, rules she twisted, and a community she had bullied into silence for years. The next day, I received an official letter from the HOA citing me for defacing common property because I'd parked the tractor on the clubhouse lawn, and they were demanding reimbursement for turf damage, irrigation repair, and emotional disruption. That last part almost made me laugh. Almost. Instead, I added the letter to my growing file and made an appointment with my lawyer, a sharp old friend named Martin, who knew HOA law like the back of his hand and had already beaten 3 different associations across the county. When I showed him the paperwork, he chuckled and said, "She's toast." We filed a formal cease and desist against Karen personally, not just the HOA, and attached all the supporting evidence: the illegal tow, the fabricated complaints, the photographic proof of the tractor never obstructing public view, and the sheriff's report. I also decided to file a civil claim for property interference and emotional distress, not because I wanted money, but because I wanted it on record. Karen didn't respond. Instead, she doubled down. Over the next week, my mailbox was flooded with notices. My fence was half an inch too high. My shed lacked a secondary permit. My porch lights were the wrong color temperature. It was laughable, but it also showed how desperate she was to regain control. Then came the surprise inspection. 3 men in polos with clipboards knocked on my door unannounced, claiming they were from the HOA Visual Compliance Committee. I told them to get off my property. They refused. I called the sheriff again. When the deputy arrived, he informed the men that unless they had a court order or were invited, they were trespassing. They left quickly. That afternoon, I put up new signs: private property, trespassers will be prosecuted. Tommy stopped by that evening with a beer and said, "You know she's not going to stop, right?" I nodded. I knew. The next escalation came at the HOA meeting, where Karen tried to pass an emergency amendment banning all visible non-passenger vehicles in the neighborhood, including riding mowers, utility trailers, and yes, tractors. She even tried to redefine carports as unsuitable for visible storage. The problem was, she didn't count on the growing number of people now on my side. Brent spoke up. So did a retired teacher named Margaret, who'd been fined for growing sunflowers instead of HOA-approved bushes. People were done being quiet. When the vote failed, Karen turned redder than a fire hydrant. The next day, I woke up to find someone had slashed the tires on my tractor and spray-painted blight across the hood. I called the sheriff again. This time, it was vandalism. We reviewed my security camera footage, and sure enough, at 2:17 a.m., a figure wearing a hoodie and gloves had crept onto my property, knife in hand, and attacked the tractor like it had personally insulted them. The sheriff reviewed the footage and asked if I wanted to press charges once they identified the suspect. I said yes. Didn't care who it was. I wanted this done right. The very next morning, Karen posted on the neighborhood forum blaming me for inciting community unrest and accusing me of endangering children with farm equipment. She even claimed my tractor leaked oil that was poisoning the soil. I responded by posting the vandalism footage and tagging the sheriff's department. The post went viral, viral for a 300-home subdivision. Comments exploded. Neighbors started comparing stories, fines, and intimidation tactics. It was like someone had pulled the plug on a dam, and the truth poured out. A guy named Leo shared that Karen had once demanded he remove his American flag because it wasn't mounted at a regulation height. A woman named Rachel revealed she was fined for having excessively whimsical Halloween decorations. It was absurd, it was infuriating, and it was all real. That's when the local news picked it up. A reporter named Cassidy called me and asked if I'd be willing to go on camera. I agreed on one condition. I didn't want to attack Karen. I wanted to talk about what HOA abuse looked like and how people could fight back. The segment aired 2 nights later, showing my tractor, the documents, and even a blurred version of the vandal footage. Karen was not named, but everyone knew. The following day, the county commissioner's office received a petition signed by over 100 homeowners demanding a full audit of the HOA's leadership, finances, and legal standing. Turns out, Karen had rewritten several rules without a full vote and diverted funds from the HOA budget for security consulting, a firm run by her nephew. That opened a new door. Fraud. A few board members resigned immediately. Karen didn't. She called an emergency meeting, locked the clubhouse, and tried to prevent attendance by claiming it was closed to the public. Brent picked the lock. Over 70 people showed up. Karen refused to speak. Instead, she left through the back door while someone took a photo of her peeling away in her golf cart. I brought the photo to the next sheriff's visit because, as it turns out, the vandal in the footage wore the same sneakers Karen was seen wearing 2 days earlier. A subpoena was issued. Her lawyer tried to block it, but the judge sided with the sheriff. They searched her garage and found the same hoodie, gloves, and spray paint can with the exact color match. When confronted, she claimed she was set up. But the chain of evidence was too clean, too specific, and too incriminating. She was charged with misdemeanor vandalism, unlawful trespassing, and HOA misconduct pending investigation. But even that wasn't the worst of it. When the forensic audit was completed 2 weeks later, it showed she'd embezzled over $12,000 in HOA funds for office furniture, committee travel, and legal services that had no receipts or contracts. She was removed from office, banned from future HOA participation, and sued by the association she once ruled. I watched it all unfold with a mixture of satisfaction and disbelief. It had taken weeks of pushing, recording, reporting, and standing my ground. But the truth had finally come out, and so had the people who were too afraid to fight before. The HOA voted in a new board, retracted dozens of unjust fines, refunded illegal fees, and hired an external law firm to rewrite the bylaws with homeowner input. As for me, I didn't ask for power. I just wanted my tractor back and my land respected. But what I got was something better, a neighborhood that finally remembered how to speak up. The fight wasn't over, not by a long shot. Karen still had court ahead of her, and something told me she wasn't done trying to claw back the power she thought was hers. What came next would test everything we'd just rebuilt, and it would shake the HOA to its core. You would think that once Karen was charged, stripped of her presidency, and effectively exiled from any future HOA dealings, the neighborhood would settle into peace. That the tractor would sit quietly in the carport without drawing attention. That people could go back to planting flowers, walking their dogs, and living without the looming shadow of threats and fines. But Karen wasn't wired that way. Defeat only made her more dangerous. And the silence that followed her removal wasn't surrender. It was plotting. The kind of quiet that masks venom. Sure enough, it started again in whispers, rumors, swirling that Karen was preparing a lawsuit against the HOA board for unlawful removal, even though the audit and charges backed every decision made. And then there were the cryptic flyers left in mailboxes overnight and signed, typed in bold font, accusing the new board of corruption and vengeance politics, urging residents to demand accountability. And though the board dismissed them at first, it didn't take long to discover that a small group of residents, mostly the same ones who voted with Karen every month, were now calling themselves the Preservation Committee, meeting in private homes, pushing for a reversal of the new bylaws, and loudly opposing any reforms aimed at homeowner protections. I didn't care about their little club until I learned they were drafting a petition to challenge the removal of Karen's restrictions, including the very exemption that allowed my tractor to stay where it belonged and they had somehow acquired. A copy of the civil complaint I filed against Karen, distributing it door-to-door with snide comments, scrawled in red pen about people who can't follow the rules they moved into. That's when it got personal again. The harassment returned, subtle at first. Someone dumped a pile of wood chips across my driveway at night. A neighbor's kid came crying to me because someone told her I was a scary man who broke the rules. And one afternoon I found a note taped to my back gate that read, "Take your tractor and go." Got called the sheriff again. Nothing on the cameras that time, just shadows and wind. But the deputy wrote it up, same as before, told me I wasn't alone, and assured me that Karen's court date was locked in 2 weeks out. Meanwhile, the new board held a town hall to discuss further reforms, and I stood up to speak. It's not to gloat, but to explain how easily a community can turn on itself when fear and silence take hold. I told them, it starts with a complaint about a tool shed and ends with vandalism and threats. If we let that back in, we deserve every bit of it. The applause that followed wasn't loud, but it was solid, steady, honest. Yet for every clap there was a glare from the Karen faithful, and I knew this war wasn't over. It had simply changed fronts. A week before her court date, Karen appeared in the neighborhood again, walking the sidewalks with a clipboard, smiling at strangers, like nothing had happened. She knocked on doors, handed out flyers, claimed she was being persecuted by men with tractors and grudges. And by the end of the week, she had a list of signatures, barely enough to trigger a vote, but enough to stir anxiety among the newer residents who didn't know the whole story. I went door to door myself that weekend, not to campaign, but to talk, face to face, about what really happened, the illegal tow, the lies, the retaliation, and for every one person who rolled their eyes, 3 more thanked me for explaining. People forget how powerful the truth can be when it's spoken calmly, directly, without rage. The night before her hearing, I received a visit from Rachel, the same neighbor who'd been fined for whimsical Halloween decor. She looked nervous, said she'd overheard Karen telling someone at the grocery store that she had a friend in the zoning office who could make life miserable for anyone who testified against her. Rachel said she was scared, but she was willing to come to court with me. That meant a lot. The next morning, the courthouse smelled like mildew and paperwork, and I sat in the front row as the judge called the case Commonwealth versus Prescott. Karen stood at the defendant's table in a tan suit, eyes narrowed, her lawyer smug and confident. My lawyer Martin leaned over and said, "Watch this guy, he's all theater." And he was opening with a speech about community values and Karen's tireless dedication to neighborhood integrity, claiming she was the real victim, targeted by a man who weaponized bureaucracy to settle personal scores. But then came our turn. Martin didn't waste time. He walked through the timeline, entered the sheriff's report, submitted the vandalism footage. The spray paint can match, and even the purchase receipt for the gloves found in Karen's garage, dated 2 days before the incident. When I was called to the stand, I kept it short. I told the truth. How it started, what she did, how it escalated. I didn't get emotional, didn't rant. I just let the evidence speak. Karen refused to testify. Her lawyer said it wasn't necessary. The judge took one look at the pile of evidence and shook her head. "This is not only criminal mischief," she said, "but a clear abuse of authority and a warning to anyone who thinks leadership gives you license to harass." Karen was sentenced to 6 months probation, fined $2,000 in restitution, and ordered to stay away from my property for a year. But that wasn't the end. The civil suit was still pending, and as that case moved forward, discovery unearthed even more males between Karen and a few of her cronies discussing how to strategically escalate violations against people they didn't like, in one message that read, "If we don't hit them with something big soon, we'll lose the whole narrative. That email became the smoking gun in the HOA's internal ethics review. And when it was leaked by someone on the new board, it torched whatever reputation Karen had left. The preservation committee dissolved overnight. Several of its members posted apologies on the neighborhood forum. One even knocked on my door with a bottle of wine and tears in her eyes, saying, "I didn't know. I really didn't know." I forgave her. I forgave most of them, because fear and misinformation are powerful tools, and Karen wielded both like weapons. I didn't forget, and I didn't stop. The new HOA board invited me to join their compliance review subcommittee, and while I wasn't keen on being part of any formal group, I agreed on the condition that everything be recorded, every decision transparent, and that no one, ever again, have the power to declare a lawnmower a threat to neighborhood harmony. The reforms rolled in steadily. Limits on fines, clear appeal procedures, a ban on anonymous complaints, and perhaps, most importantly, the implementation of a property exception clause that protected rural use equipment on lots zoned agricultural before HOA incorporation. That clause, we called it the Caldwell Clause, named after me. I didn't want the credit, but they insisted. As things stabilized, the neighborhood softened. People waved again. Kids played on sidewalks without parents glancing nervously at Karen's old house. The tractor remained in its spot, proudly polished, a little battered, but never chained or hidden again. And though peace had returned, I knew storms often came back around. What I didn't expect was the storm that showed up in the form of a federal letter and investigation into HOA corruption county-wide, triggered by Karen's misconduct and the web of fraudulent enforcement practices she left behind. Psst, the letter asked if I'd be willing to testify not just about her, but about the system she used. I said yes, because the fight wasn't just for my land anymore. It was for every neighborhood like ours, every homeowner like Brent, Margaret, and Rachel. Every place where silence had been forced by fear of fines, and where a single spark like a tractor taken in the night was all it took to light the truth on fire. The letter from the Federal Housing Oversight Committee wasn't flashy. It's just a plain envelope with a seal stamped at the top, and a typed request inside asking if I would be willing to provide a sworn statement as part of a larger investigation into homeowner association abuse in our county and possibly beyond. And though I had already faced the fire, I didn't hesitate, because I knew this wasn't just about me or Karen anymore. It was about something bigger: how small people with unchecked authority could twist regulations into weapons and turn communities into battlegrounds where neighbors feared their mailboxes, their lawn ornaments, or even just owning the wrong kind of equipment. So I signed the form, scheduled the interview, and began preparing the full record of everything that had happened from day one. From the first ridiculous citation, to the illegal towing of my tractor, to the civil suit in court, outcomes, and every HOA document Karen ever manipulated for her gain. I boxed it all up neatly, cataloged it like evidence, and when the agent arrived, an older woman named Gina, with tired eyes and a calm voice, she didn't waste time with formalities. She sat at my kitchen table, pulled out a recorder, and said, "Tell me everything you think matters." I started from the beginning, and she didn't interrupt once. When I handed her the folder with the copies, she scanned through them, nodding, stopping occasionally to mark something or ask for clarification. And when we were done 3 hours later, she looked me in the eye and said, "You're not the only one? You're the first one we've spoken to who brought proof?" I asked how far this thing went. She shook her head. "That's what we're going to find out." Over the next few weeks, I heard murmurs from other neighborhoods, places I'd never even visited, where residents were starting to come forward. Some emboldened by our story, others finding pieces of themselves in the news segment that aired about Karen and the HOA fallout. One woman from across the state emailed me personally, telling me her HOA fined her for parking a trailer in her backyard while her husband was deployed overseas. She had no one to help her fight it. I gave her Martin's number, and then another came in, and another. I started keeping a list, not for any official purpose, but to remind myself that what had happened wasn't isolated, that the system had allowed people like Karen to flourish, and now that curtain had finally been pulled back. Meanwhile, back home, Karen's presence had all but vanished. Her house sat quiet, shades drawn, and her car hadn't moved in days. But the damage she caused was still rippling through the neighborhood because not everyone was ready to let go, and some still whispered that I had gone too far, that the tractor incident should have been resolved without dragging it through the courts and news. I didn't argue with them. I just let the facts stand, because the truth didn't need defending, it just needed daylight. The new HOA board, meanwhile, was working overtime to rebuild trust. They invited residents to monthly open forums, hired an outside firm to review every policy, and even set up an anonymous suggestion box that was surprisingly effective at rooting out lingering problems. I attended each meeting quietly, sitting in the back, listening, observing, only speaking when it mattered. The landscaping committee. Margaret started a community garden. Rachel hosted a neighborhood potluck. The change was slow, but it was real. Then one morning, a sleek black sedan pulled into my driveway. 2 agents stepped out, federal badges, suits, one with a briefcase. They introduced themselves as field investigators following up on Gina's report and asked if I'd be willing to show them where the tractor had been parked, where the vandalism occurred, and where the HOA meetings were typically held. I walked them through it all, showed them the shed, the driveway, the carport, the spots marked by tire gouges where the tow truck had dragged the tractor away. They took photos, asked questions, even interviewed a couple of neighbors who happened to be out walking. When they were done, one of them said, "We're building a profile. We think what happened here is part of a pattern." I asked if Karen would be facing federal charges. They wouldn't say, only that the financial records from our HOA had opened several doors. A few days later, someone leaked an internal memo from the Oversight Committee listing over a dozen HOAs under investigation, including ours. Karen's name was on that list. She left town the next week. No goodbye, no statement, no closure. Her house was listed online within days. A sign out front managed by a third-party company, and just like that, she vanished. But even with her gone, the shadow of what she'd done lingered, and the neighborhood remained cautious. Like a town that had survived a tornado and was now tiptoeing around every creaking board. I kept using the tractor weekly, mowing, hauling, even offering to help neighbors fix up their yards or move heavy things. What used to be a point of conflict had become a symbol of resistance, a rolling green and yellow reminder that no matter how deep the rules, no matter how loud the threats, people could push back. Then one afternoon, while clearing some brush along the back of the lot, I stumbled across something half buried near the tree line. A metal box, rusted, sealed with a padlock. Curiosity got the better of me. I brought it to the shed, cut it open, and inside were papers-old HOA minutes, handwritten notes, a list of homeowners marked with red ink, and an envelope labeled Anonymous Tips. Most were nonsense, scribbled complaints about porch colors and barking dogs. But a few were far more disturbing photocopies of violation letters issued before the rules even existed. Unsigned fines, fabricated meeting logs. It was a mini archive of manipulation, and judging by the handwriting, all Karen's. I brought it to the board. They called an emergency session, verified the documents, and decided to turn everything over to the investigators. That box would later be cited in a federal report outlining how certain HOA officials manipulated governance procedures for personal and political gain. And though no one ever officially proved Karen planted it, the evidence was damning. Enough to lead to stricter HOA disclosure laws across the state. I wasn't trying to be a crusader, I just wanted to mow my lawn. But sometimes change doesn't come from speeches or campaigns, it comes from someone refusing to move. From a man parking his tractor exactly where it belongs and daring the world to tell him he's wrong. By the time summer rolled around, the neighborhood was brighter. Kids played in the sprinklers. Flags waved without being measured. People started bringing out decorations, again some tasteful, some hideous, but all freely chosen. There were still arguments, still debates about trash bins and pet waste stations. But now they happened out in the open, respectfully, without fear of secret retaliation. The HOA even added a rule requiring every board meeting to be live-streamed and archived for public access. Transparency, once a joke, was now the law. And me? I started sleeping better. I still locked the gate, still checked the cameras, but the tension in my chest had eased. That was until I got a call from the Oversight Committee asking if I'd be willing to speak at a regional conference about HOA abuse. Specifically, how average homeowners could protect themselves and build community resilience. I hesitated at first. Public speaking wasn't my thing. But then I remembered all the people who'd emailed, who'd called, who'd thanked me for doing what they couldn't. I owed it to them, so I agreed. I stood in front of a hall of 200 people, shared my story, showed them photos of the tractor, the fines, the courtroom sketch someone had drawn of Karen looking stunned when the charges were read. I ended by saying, they thought they could scare me. But fear only works if you stay silent. The applause was loud, real. Afterwards, people lined up to talk, share their own stories, ask questions, take notes. I didn't feel like a victim anymore. I felt like a neighbor. It's like someone who'd survived something ugly and helped others find the strength to push back. But just when I thought it was truly over, a letter arrived this time from Karen herself. A single page, handwritten, no return address. It read, I hope you're happy. You destroyed everything I built. No apology. No ownership. Just spite. I burned it in the fire pit that night. Watched the flames consume the ink. Then I turned and saw Rachel, Brent, and a few others standing by the fence. Beer in hand, laughing about a new neighbor who wanted to paint their shutters purple. What do you think? Rachel asked. I grinned. I think they should do it. Let the shutters scream. We all laughed. The air was light again. But deep down I knew there was still one chapter left in this saga. One more confrontation that would bring everything full circle. Because just when Karen was gone for good, someone new was about to move into her house and they weren't coming alone. The for sale sign on Karen's front lawn had barely been replaced with a sold placard when the moving trucks arrived, 2 of them. Sleek, spotless, and operated by a crew dressed in matching uniforms, unloading pristine white boxes like they were staging a model home rather than moving into one that still smelled of hostility and scorched earth. And as I stood by my gate, sipping coffee and watching from a distance, I wondered what kind of person would buy Karen Prescott's house. With all its recent infamy, still fresh in every corner of the neighborhood. But what I didn't expect was a man in a 3-piece suit to step out of a black Escalade and begin giving orders like he was moving into a corporate headquarters instead of a community built on porches and cracked sidewalks. He had a square jaw, polished shoes, and a wife with high heels sinking into the lawn. Tapping at a tablet, inspecting the flower beds with all the warmth of an IRS audit. They didn't smile, didn't wave, didn't nod at the handful of curious neighbors cautiously peering from their driveways. And it wasn't until later that evening that I heard the rumors begin. A few board members whispering that the man, Malcolm Thorne, was a real estate lawyer from out of state who specialized in HOA revitalizations, a term that instantly triggered a nauseous déjà vu in my gut. By the following week, Malcolm had introduced himself at the monthly HOA meeting, not as a new neighbor looking to meet the community, but as someone with considerable experience in restructuring residential compliance systems, and within minutes he was floating ideas about modernizing the covenant framework, restoring lost procedural integrity, and re-establishing necessary enforcement mechanisms. The room froze. I looked at Brent, who muttered under his breath, "He's Karen with cufflinks." Margaret didn't laugh. Neither did I. We'd barely started healing. Now this. The board, still freshly reformed and trying to maintain balance, tried to ease the tension by thanking Malcolm for his interest. But it was clear that the man didn't come to participate, he came to lead. Over the next 2 weeks, flyers began appearing in mailboxes again, this time polished, professionally printed, quoting statutes, suggesting loophole closures and property value protections. And by the end of the month, Malcolm had formally requested a seat on the board. That's when I stood up. Not angrily, not even loudly, just with calm, quiet certainty. I reminded everyone in that meeting, some scarred veterans, what had happened the last time someone rewrote rules behind closed doors. How Karen had started the same way, with language about harmony and aesthetics. How it ended with police reports, court hearings, and a community turned against itself. I said, leadership isn't about control. It's about protection. We don't need someone to fix us. We need to remember how to live next to each other. The applause wasn't thunderous, and it was enough. Malcolm didn't get the seat. Not that month, but he didn't give up either. And so I prepared, not for war, but for endurance. I updated my records. I archived everything. I refiled the Caldwell clause with a state notary. And I made sure the new board knew that if they ever needed me, I'd be there. Not because I wanted power, because I knew how quickly it could be abused. The tractor still sat proudly in my carport, polished now, its seat covered with a new cushion, a fresh American flag mounted to its roll bar. It wasn't just a tool anymore. It was a monument, a reminder that when good people dig in, refuse to yield, and speak the truth without fear, even the strongest bully will eventually fall. Rachel's sunflowers bloomed bigger than ever that summer. Brent built a new shed, painted it bright blue, dared anyone to complain. Tommy started a barbecue club. Kids played with chalk on sidewalks, and no one reported the mess. We were still a neighborhood, still flawed, still growing, but we were no longer afraid. The federal report was released that fall. Our case, the tractor case, was listed first. A warning, they called it, to every HOA in the country about overreach, about power used without checks, about residents pushed to the brink. My name wasn't in the headlines. I didn't want it to be. But those who knew, knew. A few months later, I got a call from a young couple from another county. They said they'd seen my story online, were facing fines over a chicken coop, and asked if I had any advice. I told them to stay calm, stay organized, document everything. I told them they only win if you give up before the truth has its turn. After we hung up, I went outside, sat on the tractor, stared at the land, and listened. The wind was soft. No sirens. No shouting. Just peace, for now. But I knew better than to believe it would last forever. There would always be another Malcolm, another Karen, another clipboard waiting in the shadows. But this time, we'd be ready. Because this neighborhood learned the hard way how to stand up. And once people stand together, they don't go down. Easy. If this story stirred something in you've ever felt small against a system too big or too unfair, then don't stay silent. Speak up. Push back. And subscribe to the Sham Stories YouTube channel, where real people and true drama remind us that justice starts with just one voice saying, enough.